Uh-oh. We're
We have feedback. Welcome to Cocktails and Calamity, the show where we get a little bit lit and discuss the technology, politics, and social transformation shaping humanity's global future. Michael and Kristen here at the Calamity Desk. We've got an amazing show for you today. We are here to debate Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency exploding onto the scene again in 2020. I've got Indi Samarajiva joining us today. Indi is a writer and social commentator hailing from Sri Lanka. It is 6 a.m., Indi, for you. Is that right?
Yeah, it's 5:30, yeah.
5:30 a.m. for you. Well, we really appreciate you joining us this early. We invited Indi specifically. We've had him on before, and he's an amazing guest. And I wanted him back specifically because he has an alternative viewpoint on Bitcoin than a lot of the folks here in the U.S. You wrote an article recently called "How Bitcoin is Hostile AI. Who Needs Skynet to Destroy the Human World? Just Throw Tech Bros Some Coin." We've also got Alex Dischinger joining us. Alex is the creator of the Tucson Bitcoin podcast. He is a passionate advocate of Bitcoin in the fight against income inequality. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you both. I'm really excited. It's going to be an awesome show. So first thing I want to do is explain to our listeners who may not know and give them a little background, maybe a layman's background on Bitcoin. Alex, do you mind kicking us off with a layman's explanation of Bitcoin?
Yeah, sure. So Bitcoin is really an anomaly. There have been a lot of attempts at digital cash before that had failed. And one of the biggest issues was trying to figure out how to make it decentralized and government proof, and then making it decentralized also created an issue where it would be easy to forge the currency and expand it. So making it so that it is a secure network so that it can't be done that way. So the way I think of Bitcoin is it is a digital money that is not controlled by any central authority, has a fixed monetary policy that is set in stone, and does not have inflation in the same way that the US dollar is, because it has a fixed supply of 21 million total. So that's just kind of a brief rundown of how I explain Bitcoin.
Got it. So it's a decentralized currency. So it's not under the influence, or I should say, under the ownership of any sort of reserve. It is democratized so that anybody can access it at any point. It's not contingent on being able to purchase it during market hours, anything like that. And it's completely deregulated. Indi, I'd love to hear from you a little bit. You wrote an interesting article. So for those of you just joining us, Indi wrote an article called "How Bitcoin is Hostile AI. Who Needs Skynet to Destroy the Human World? Just Throw Tech Bros Some Coin." Indi, if you could share with us your perspective, where you're coming from on this, and why you think Bitcoin is going to destroy us.
So I think what Alex is talking is about the intent of Bitcoin. And if you read the original paper, it's like that. But that's kind of like the original intent of Animal Farm. But if you know the end of Animal Farm, now if you look around the table, like you can't tell the pigs and men apart. Bitcoin is in no way a functioning currency. Like, people don't use Bitcoin to buy things. Bitcoin's become a speculative asset class. And he said it doesn't have inflation, as if that's some great thing, but has built-in deflation, as in it becomes harder and harder to mine. And by mining, that means CPU resources. So Bitcoin is actually, the scarcity it creates is through proof of work. And so that's actually a computational problem. You have a bunch of computers essentially solving Sudoku puzzles. So as the supply of Bitcoin goes on in time, it has to use, by design, more and more resources. It's actually a speculative asset that's based on resource consumption. So I think people have this sort of dream that, this is like, we're going to reject central banks and like capitalism, and it's like a digital currency. It's not used as a digital currency. Like in Africa, they have digital currencies. In Sri Lanka, we have phone-based digital currencies. That's not what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a speculative asset for rich people, which is essentially an investment in climate change. It's essentially, and resource use. It's terminal capitalism. It's not what it started out to be. I've read Satoshi's original paper, and it's actually, I think it's a fascinating algorithm. It's a fascinating idea. It's a fascinating thing. I think it's a cool technological concept. But then if you look at what it's become, you're like, did an AI write this? Because if I was an AI and I was like, how do I get humans to keep improving my technology while consuming their resources and fucking up their, flesh livable earth? I'd be like, wait, what if I give them some speculative asset, let them pretend it's a currency, and then they'll keep improving my GPUs and, burning energy to do fuck all. It's just like it's a speculative asset. It's like the tulip bubble.
Damn. Okay, so let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're basically saying it's a commodity as opposed to a currency, and so, but it wasn't gold. When we were on the gold standards, right? Wasn't that a commodity that the currency was built off of? Like, I don't understand why that's different than gold, for an example.
Well, let's say gold. So in Sri Lanka, so my wife likes gold. So and in Sri Lanka, people like gold because you can wear it, right? It has some use. So that's the value base of it. The value base of it is that it looks nice. You can also use it in semiconductors and stuff. It has some value, and it is resource extraction. Every capitalism itself is kind of the problem with climate change. Any asset has some, oil is an asset. You can trade oil. That's a bad thing that causes climate change. And yet it also does some work. So when I say Bitcoin is end capitalism, is they find this is the most fiat of fiat currencies, as in it does nothing. It just produces resource extraction. There's no value at the end of it. Gold has sort of some value at the end of it. You can make something out of it, right? You can make a chair out of it. You can't eat it, but you can use gold for something. But Bitcoin has actually no use beyond the resource extraction.
Alex, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of critique of Bitcoin that's built on the assumption that it doesn't have value, and I don't think that's a fair assumption. So why Bitcoin?
I didn't say it doesn't have value. I said it doesn't have use.
So why Bitcoin is increasing in price, and different companies like MicroStrategy, Tesla, insurance companies like Mass Mutual are buying it, is because of its inherent properties of it being one, not being debased like a lot of the other assets, and because of its ability to self-custody. So I think for the general person, of what I try and teach people about is, the majority of people that I know have their wealth stored primarily in fiat currencies. So they get their paychecks, they put a little bit maybe into pension fund.
Would you mind just defining fiat currency for those listening?
Sure. So fiat currency is currency decreed by government. So that's what fiat means, is it just means decreed. So the way that we currently have a system is that the fiat is essentially not backed by hard assets like gold like it used to be. So there is an infinite amount of expansion that's possible with it. And as we're seeing with the trillions and trillions of dollars that are being printed, and instead it's backed by the faith of a government and enforced by borders. So that's what gives it its legitimacy versus something like Bitcoin, which is borderless. So.
Right. So sorry, I didn't mean to take you off your track there, but so basically you're saying that cryptocurrency still has, so the question was not, does it have value? The question was it of any use? And so your argument, Indi, was that there is no physical use for Bitcoin like there is for gold. But is that required? Should there be a physical use required when it comes to hard money?
No, not necessarily.
Seashells. We used to trade seashells with it, but
those are beautiful. I mean, my daughters love seashells, or my daughter loves.
Fair enough.
Comical. You can burn dollar bills. So, if you were in Texas a few weeks ago.
So look, Alex keeps talking about Bitcoin like it's a currency, or that it's that as the fiat money, all this stuff money is bad and we shouldn't have that. But the fact is, if everything was replaced with cryptocurrency, we would just be, the resource use would be more than all of human resource use right now. We'd be using insane amounts of resource use just to do random stuff. And if you read Satoshi's paper, he talks about all the problems with, currencies and and credit and so on. But then he says, oh, but cash is fine for that. Cash solves most of those problems. Like cash is actually like a pretty good thing, as in you do the resource extraction once. It's not based on like some GPU in like fucking China burning coal all the time. Like, you know, he's positioning Bitcoin against a lot of real ills. Like people are like, yeah, I don't like the fucking central government. Like I don't like bankers and so on. But then that's not what Bitcoin has actually become. I'm telling you, it's like Animal Farm. Like he's talking about all the insurance companies and like billionaires and stuff getting into it. Like look around the table. You can't tell pigs from men anymore. It's a cool idea. Like what Satoshi really talks about is fascinating. But that's simply, if you read the paper now and see what it's become, that's not what it's become. It's not a currency. Like someone in Sri Lanka was talking about this recently. They're like, oh, if I run my GPU all the time, then I can earn like, you know, $5 a day. And then he's saying like, I can buy coconuts with that. Like you can't buy coconuts with fucking Bitcoin. Bitcoin's just like the same like rich white people who are just like getting more richer and like, I guess the same level of whiteness.
But you can buy a Tesla now? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's
With
like,
Bitcoin?
oh, some billionaires. These are symbolic things. Like it's not
No.
currency. And when with a currency, you kind of want it to inflate a bit. Inflation is good for like a currency. A currency should not constantly be deflating. The point is that a currency should not move wildly, which is what Bitcoin is doing. Bitcoin is moving wildly in the other direction by design, which makes it useless as a currency. If I'm going to, nobody's going to spend Bitcoin because they don't know if it'll be worth like 400 times that in 2 years. So it's a useless currency.
What is your position, Alex? Because you one of the things that you believe is that Bitcoin can be used to reduce income inequality, reduce the gap between the uber rich and those struggling deeply. What's your theory behind that argument?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, on the idea that Bitcoin isn't being used as a currency, the Bitcoin's only 12 years old. You know, and so there's a lot of development that is going into it currently to make it a little bit more easy to transact. So one of the things that I do is I help content creators and local businesses on ramp to accept Bitcoin. And it's not going to be like their main revenue source today, you know, but one of the issues that we have is we have all these payment processors that take a haircut off of small retail and restaurants and all sorts of small businesses. I mean, if you've ever used one before, the fees are just astronomical. Whereas Bitcoin, you can accept it without fees. So, you know, the Lightning Network has been growing tremendously. And
what is that Lightning Network?
Yeah,
but Bitcoin can't even process many transactions per second. Like it's not suitable for that. This is like saying you should like buy like art with like gold teeth. Like, why would you do that? Like just pay like 2% to PayPal.
Yeah, you're right in the sense that Bitcoin can only process about 7 transactions on its base layer. You know, but
what does that mean? What does that mean?
7 transactions a second on its base layer. So if
what
we're
is a
going to
base
be using
layer? What's a base layer?
The actual like base protocol in which it operates. So when I explain this to people, I mean, so cash right now is kind of like the base level settlement. But you know, we use services like Venmo that are built on top of the cash because it's a lot more efficient and quick. Because if every single transaction from bank to bank that we had to do, the bank had to put money in an envelope and send it, it wouldn't be very efficient. And so that's kind of how second layer networks like the Lightning Network or Liquid work, where they're built on top of Bitcoin, but they don't settle until you choose to on the base layer. So that brings a lot of the strain off the main chain, because you know one of the criticisms of Bitcoin that's come up a lot is the fees are too high. You know, it's not going to scale. But that's not true, because you know what Bitcoin is trying to do as a decentralized money is provide network security. It needs to be, if there's nobody backing it with a government and with guns, it needs to be really solid. And so that's why, you know, the proof of work operates as is, it provides a tremendous amount of security. So I don't see it necessarily.
That's not quite true either, because say Bitcoin, people set up exchanges and so on. Those things get robbed like all the time. There's huge like multi-million-dollar, because the thing is so inefficient. It's basically a shitty database.
Yeah, I don't really
think. You're saying wait. You're saying that Bitcoins are getting stolen?
Exchanges.
Bitcoin,
exchanges like implode all the time.
Sure. Yeah. Bitcoin. So like, if you look at like fiat monies right now in its digital form, it's just numbers in a database. You can go into a bank and you can steal the physical cash and walk out with it, and that's kind of how Bitcoin works. Is it, yes, it can be stolen, but that has nothing to do with the network security, which is what proof of work offers. So there's a lot of other projects out there trying to come out with things like proof of stake, which is super problematic because the majority stakeholder in the network really has control. So the exchanges have the control. Large stakeholders have the control rather than the network being available and everybody applying by the same rules. So I disagree with that a lot. And as far as its currency status, I mean, Bitcoin solves problems today. I mean, one of the biggest problems that individuals have is that they're running at a net negative constantly. The inflation numbers are not that are presented to us by the Fed are not accurate. And so, I've had a lot of immigrants on my podcast to talk about it. People coming from countries that have experienced tremendous amounts of inflation in a very short amount of time and have had their wealth just completely wiped out. And so Bitcoin offers protection for that. In a really
because it's a commodity, right? Isn't that the idea? Is that it offers protection because it is a commodity, like you're investing in it. It's not really, that's the biggest thing I don't quite get. Like the whole purpose of Bitcoin, I thought, was that it was going to be a digital currency where you can move the money fast, but it seems to me that it's more of a commodity that you can park your liquidity in and then borrow against, actually, right? Isn't that kind of where it's headed?
And dude, immigrants understand like commodities. Like we buy gold. Like if we immigrate, we travel with like our wealth around our necks generally.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest benefits of Bitcoin is you can just load it up on a encrypted flash drive and carry
yeah, man,
it.
this is not for us, man. This is not for like income inequality. You're positioning all these real social ills and saying Bitcoin is the answer to them. It's not. Bitcoin is just a speculative asset, which is to make money. And by design, something that deflates all the time is not something like, hey, I just got off the boat from like Sri Lanka. I'm going to get Bitcoin. It's going to change my life. No, you need to it doesn't work. It doesn't solve those problems. If you read the algorithm, it's very specific, and it's a deflationary thing. So a currency that constantly there's less of is also not good for the world. Like things that release value, like are actual digital currencies. Like here we have just mobile currency. In Africa, it's all over the place. So people have mobile currency. People don't talk about that. That's what actually benefits income inequality. That's what actually helps our workers in the Middle East transfer money back and so on. But nobody's fucking using Bitcoin for that, man. And
is it possible that both can be true? Is it possible that Bitcoin can be a commodity asset that is something that you can park your money in and then move in and out of borrowing against digital currencies?
It is possible, but the fact is that Bitcoin right now is using the electricity of Argentina. And so when people like Alex go on and talk about everybody should use Bitcoin, okay, more people use Bitcoin, then it'll be using the electricity of the United Kingdom, then it'll be using the electricity of the United States, then it'll be using of the world. And then for this speculative asset, which like gold, you dig it up once, right? The damage is done. Bitcoin, it keeps mining. And again, by design, the algorithm makes it harder and harder. You need to solve this Sudoku puzzle in like 10 minutes. And the Sudoku puzzle keeps getting harder and harder. So the computer GPUs keep improving. They keep throwing those out. We're literally just creating GPUs, which is what essentially AI runs on. And then melting the earth and like fucking killing coral reefs and like our friends, the koalas, in order to do what? So like a couple people can get richer. Meanwhile, they're like, oh no, but in income inequality, we're helping like immigrants. Like, no, you're not. That's not how you help immigrants. It's through like white people getting richer.
Do you have a rebuttal to that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, if you see what so you brought up Argentina. So if you see what the people have gone through in Argentina with multiple massive levels of inflation, and
look, I'm not saying inflation is not a problem, but Bitcoin is not the solution to that problem.
Let him finish.
All right.
Yes.
We'll get back to you. We got an hour and a half. We got all the time in the world, gentlemen. Let's take it slow.
Yeah, well, kind of backtracking. I always appreciate pushback on these topics because it's fun to think about, and I think there are problems that we need to solve. I'm not a spokesperson for Bitcoin, and really what I say about it doesn't really matter. I'm just sharing what my understanding of it is and how I see it benefit normal people. But if you look like at a country like Argentina or Venezuela, so what happens when a currency fails? Well, the government comes in and they will create really strict laws, and they'll force people into the local currency, and as a result, their wealth will be completely destroyed. And so, when the currency devalues, the asset prices go up tremendously. And so the rich benefit tremendously from something like that, because they own the land, they own, all the physical assets, they own the means to production, and those things are stable. But for your normal person, we see videos in Venezuela of just like the currency being just like dumped on the streets.
Right.
Like my brother was in Bolivia and Peru, and people were just selling it as souvenirs because it was so worthless. And there's not a lot of times an option to that, whereas Bitcoin, isn't permissionless in the same way. You're not relying on the banking system to protect yourself, and it'll be available in ways that a more stable currency isn't. So like typically what they do in a country like Venezuela or Argentina, when the currency fails, is people trying to get their hands on a stable currency like the dollar. And, unfortunately, like as I look into the future, as all the central banks are printing in unison, and the system is just looking fractured, and you have the IMF coming out and saying that we need to have a new Bretton Woods because the system is broken. People need another option outside of that.
Right.
And the properties that Bitcoin has make it a lot more attractive for people in the circumstances. So I live in Tucson, Arizona, which is not really a remarkable city in any ways. We don't have a thriving economy, and comparatively to some other cities, our economy consists of making missiles, which I have an issue with. We have a university, and we have the country's largest Air Force base. And so there's a lot of people that are really just, lingering on the outsides of the economy and really hurting. Right. And they're operating generally on a paycheck to paycheck basis of like using money that is constantly devaluing and at a rate that they are having trouble understanding.
Right.
They just know that, things aren't the way they used to be. Their buck doesn't go as far. The groceries are more expensive.
And they have no idea why or how to get ahead. Can you guys answer this? So I think this is important because a lot of people don't quite understand this. So Keith says, I'm just not connecting the dots between Bitcoin and actual environmental damage. How do you mine Bitcoin?
So I can read from Satoshi's original paper on that. So he says the longest chain not only serves as proof. The longest chain not only serves as proof of the sequence of events witnessed, but proof that it came from the largest pool of CPU power. So there's a Sudoku puzzle, like a 10-minute, it essentially should take 10 minutes. And by design, it's supposed to come, it's like a competition among all the miners. It's supposed to come from whoever's using the most CPU power. So what he talks about that it does use like electricity the most. I'll look for that quote as well.
So do you want to add on that while he's looking for that up, Alex?
Yeah. The environmental impact of Bitcoin is thrown out there a lot. And I think of like a fair comparison would be, you have to look at Bitcoin as a monetary network. And so you have to compare it to other monetary networks, which, in this case, we're referring to the US dollar system and the amount of energy that goes into it. So it is a really nuanced conversation. I mean, you can really look at the type of energy that Bitcoin uses. A lot of it, something like 40% of it is renewable energy. Bitcoin energy, if I were to mine in Tucson, it wouldn't be very profitable because the electricity costs are high. So Bitcoin has to go to the closest source. And so if I were to mine in Arizona, the closest source would be the Hoover Dam up kind of near Nevada, Arizona border. And that's entirely renewable. If you go up there, the energy is really inexpensive. So that's kind of a cool concept that Bitcoin offers, is that you can go to remote places where there's an excess of energy. And that's another thing about Bitcoin's energy use is it's not like it's just using new energy and competing with normal people. It's going and it's using excess energy. So Bitcoin or electricity can only be transported a certain distance before it really loses its potency.
Right.
so it is an interesting thing. And one of the things that really interests me about Bitcoin is how it could monetize renewable energy projects. So a lot of
Dude,
I
we
mean,
monetize it by using it to like power our fridges and like heart machines and stuff. Like you're saying,
Also,
go into
let me-
remote
let me- let
areas
me-
and use
let-
electricity. Like in remote areas, like people can use that electricity.
Let me just throw something in here. I want to hear what you have to say on that, Indy. So I just want to add, just for clarity's sake, so people really understand. Like when you're mining Bitcoin, you're running computers, and it's the computing power and the energy that those computers suck in to actually run and mine the network. So you could have huge warehouses. And so, Indy, you mentioned in your article that the amount of electricity that's being used to run all of Bitcoin is the same amount of energy that's used to run Argentina, right? Is that accurate?
Yes. So there's this Cambridge does some analysis of it. It's not like published, but so based on their analysis, they're saying that's how much energy is used. And when people talk about, more people need to use Bitcoin, okay, fine, that's like more and more energy. And they're saying, we'll switch to renewable energy. But again, that's not good. Like what's causing climate change and hurting the earth is our overconsumption. So Bitcoin is just pure overconsumption. If you switch to renewable, that's fine. We're still generating more energy, and that's still energy that's going away from normal people. Like, okay, so if your energy is like when you put on a light, it's something's going on at the Hoover Dam. Like, so if Bitcoin is suddenly saying, we're going to use the Hoover Dam, it's renewable, then people in Arizona are going to be like, wait, why are my electricity prices going up?
The energy costs will go up because
and
of
then
that.
He's saying you need to compare it to like something like the dollar transactions, that the energy use. As people like use more dollars and so on, it doesn't use more energy. If Bitcoin was to do the same amount of transactions as the dollars, it would use more energy than we're using right now, like total. So that's not, this isn't a good idea. Like it's cool for what it is, which is an interesting algorithm, but it's not the solution to all the problems that Alex and people put it out to be. It has nothing to do with income inequality. Like my income is fairly unequal. Like it doesn't do shit for me. It's not the solution to just inflation being bad. So he's talked about Argentina and so on. Like, so is the solution for Argentina when their currency devalues to use suddenly double their resources? Or it would be triple if everyone, it would be exponential if like everyone in Argentina would suddenly like switch to Bitcoin to solve their inflation problem. So
isn't there an argument to be made here that the amount of energy that the current banking infrastructure uses, like all of the banks of the world, all of the reserves, all of the lawyers, all of the bankers, all of the carbon footprint of everybody who's doing daily work to keep the Federal Reserve going and to keep all of the subsidiaries and all of the banks and all of, and protect the gold and protect, right? So think about the carbon footprint behind protecting our global monetary funds.
Yeah.
Don't you think that is, don't you think there's as much, if not more, way more energy going into that than there is going into mining Bitcoin?
Absolutely. And I think there is an argument for that. There is an argument for all the things Alex is talking about. All I'm saying is that Bitcoin is not the answer.
Why?
Because let's say you're saying these things have high energy usage. Fine. If we replace them with Bitcoin, it has higher energy usage. So Bitcoin is not the answer to that. Say income inequality. You're saying, people like don't know, people don't have enough money. That's fine. We'll give them some money of which there's constantly less and less of by design. It's not the answer. It's not the answer to any of these problems. Let's say, central banks suck and they're evil. Fine. We're going to give it to control of essentially like it's billionaires and millionaires who are like controlling Bitcoin and like manipulating with tweets. And that's what you're going to replace it with? You're going to replace the central bank, which at least you have central banks are fucking stupid, but you're going to replace like democratic governments with like Elon Musk tweeting. Like it's not the answer.
So Jacob says some of the largest Bitcoin farms are solar through Mongolia. That's interesting.
Well, we know that solar has its own individual problems, which comes back to a different type of mining, which is the cobalt mining for the battery storage. So,
right.
Yeah, like so with Bitcoin when it started, nobody thought like this was going to use some. I mean, if you read the paper, it's obvious. It does talk about. Actually, I'll read a bit from the paper. So by convention, the first transaction in a block is a special transaction that starts a new coin owned by the creator of the block. This adds an incentive for nodes to support the network and provides a way to initially distribute coins into circulation, since there's no central authority to issue them. this is the relevant part. The steady addition of constant amount of new coins is analogous to gold miners expending resources to add gold to circulation. In our case, it is CPU time and electricity that is expended. So I guess you could have, like whoever wrote this, it could be an AI that wrote this, but whoever wrote this knew that like the base of the currency was resource extraction. Like that's not some like new insight that people have come up. That's baked into the design of Bitcoin itself.
Right.
So how comparable is like the amount of energy that's being consumed versus the amount of time that it's taking from the humans who are?
Does it take time? Is it something that like people actually have to put their energy into, or once you set it up, you're just mining away?
Everything
Alex?
takes time, right? But
yeah, so Bitcoin mining is really fascinating if you get into it and you get into the economics of it. So it is a very competitive industry. So if I was going to set up my computer and mine it in my house, it'd be a complete waste of energy and it would not be profitable. I'd be operating at a negative. Even if I bought a large amount of ASICs, which is the specialized computers that mine Bitcoin, where I'm at, the energy costs are too high, so it wouldn't be profitable. Even if I were to get a tax exemption or a contract with the local energy company, it would not be profitable where I'm at. So that being said, it does take a tremendous amount of energy to do that. But what that energy is going towards is securing the network. So the more energy that goes into it, the more secure the network comes. So I liked Indi brought up sustainability. So one of the issues that I have with inflation is that it's a very unsustainable idea. You know, this idea that deflation is a negative thing is, well, in it right now where we're currently at, where our entire monetary system is built on debt. Sure, monetary deflation would be devastating because it would make the debt more expensive. We wouldn't be able to repay it. We're all leveraged way more than I think is responsible. You know, if we look at our government, the debt to GDP is just absolutely ridiculous, and there's no way we're going to come back from that. Under sound money, there's a lot more incentive to save. You know, because your money isn't just devaluing like a melting ice cube. So that means that you're less likely to go out and consume. You're more likely to think about the long term, about doing things that are a little bit more sustainable. I recently had a real estate developer on the podcast. He has a Substack titled Bitcoin Urbanism. And his whole idea is how a Bitcoin standard would lead to much more stable growth in the future. So, you know, the way our current monetary system works in the United States is that it demands constant expansion. You know, we need to continue to grow more, to buy more, to, you know, do more,
have more babies, to
and
mine more Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's really unfortunate, you know, because, you know, if you look at the entire industrial revolution was launched on a gold standard, on a deflationary monetary policy. So, you know, the idea that, you know, we can't do that in the future is, I think, wrong inherently. So, yeah, those are just some thoughts I had.
Yeah, so
your eyes got
revolution.
really big. Your eyes got really big.
Yeah, so we shouldn't do another, like literally the trouble we're in now is because of the industrial revolution. Like we shouldn't do things the same way. That's like, you know, it's like, oh, we did that and the whole fucking earth melted. Let's like try it again, except like exponentially. Like we need to find a different way of growth. Like actually degrowth is a better idea than this endless sort of cancerous growth that we have. And your position, so look, when Bitcoin started, this is what the paper said. It said it's going to be a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash, which would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution, which isn't what Bitcoin has become. And so now they're telling us, oh, it's going to like lead us to like more sustainable growth.
Right, but does anybody know why
it's a sales
it has
pitch, man?
But why?
Because it's deflationary. Because you wouldn't buy like a pizza. Some people bought like 50-cent albums with Bitcoin, and 50 Cent suddenly like turned around. He's like, holy shit! Like I have like $500,000 worth of Bitcoin now, because some dumb people bought albums, and those people are like, shit. Some people bought like pizza with Bitcoin, So if it's like, if it's a speculative asset, it becomes useless. A currency has to have some sort of stable value. Like, the problem with inflation is there's many problems, but it makes a currency unstable. But deflation also makes the currency unstable. So Bitcoin is accelerating at a rate which makes it completely unstable as a currency, and eventually, God willing, it'll go down. And then that also makes it unstable as a currency. You're not going to buy coconuts with that.
Right. So are you going to short Bitcoin?
I don't have enough money for that shit, man.
With your hope.
I would
There's gotta
highly
be another
encourage you, Indy, to
GameStop.
short Bitcoin.
I don't know.
Ooh.
Yeah. So
It's been drawn.
No, man. I wouldn't touch it, man. It's blood money.
So
Oh, damn it, NDC. Now I'm like, okay, why is it blood money? Why do you call it blood money?
Because, dude, it's fucking melting in Sri Lanka. Like, our friends in the Maldives are going down. Like, we don't need to be burning. Like, fucking white people don't need to be using more resources right now. Y'all need to fucking stop. Just like stop. Go to Africa and figure out how fucking phone cash exchanges work. That's like how shit works. Like, stop using resources.
Wait. What is a phone cash exchange?
So like just did like through your phone you can transfer money, or literally like before all this shit happened, we had these hawalas. Like in India, you could you go to some dude in fucking Dubai and say like, I need to send like $30 to my grandma, and he's like, cool, and then he calls his guy in Mumbai, and then they transfer the money. There's no fucking transaction fees. Like, figure out how hawalas work. That's like zero energy. It's like two bros in India who make a phone call.
I can't even send money to one of my assistants in Jamaica directly. Like, anytime I send money, like it's a 3-day process of him having to go to his bank and me having to communicate with his bank. Like, no, I mean to send money to this man who's doing work for me. Like, it's the fact that I can't easily do that is insane.
This is honestly
So try TransferWise.
My father was in floral wire service for years when I was a kid. So this is like on a trust basis, right? Like, the money gets paid to not the florist that the money is given to. It gets paid to the florist who actually creates the flower arrangement and delivers it to the person in a totally different state.
Okay.
It was on trust basis. So when I used to ask my dad like what he did for a living, he said, well, I'm kind of a banker.
Oh, so did he have to break people's kneecaps if they didn't come through?
No, but that's a cultural role. Like, that's older than money is. That's sort of like credit banking, where like, I make the money go this way and the flowers go that way. Like, look, I think Bitcoin people are positioning this as the answer to a lot of social ills. And my point is, we don't need like rich white people to answer social ills. Like, we don't need more resource consumption to get us out of the fucking shit that we're in right now. Like, you can do it as like your hobby and saying you want to get rich. I guess that's cool. But saying that it's going to like help immigrants or it's going to help income inequality, that's just bullshit. Or sustainability, like, that's, come on. Like, we're going to find a use for renewable energy. Like, come on, we have a use for renewable energy. You just use it as like normal energy to like power TVs and shit. Like, look, Bitcoin, it's like a sales pitch to keep this thing ever going, because the original sales pitch didn't work out. So what Satoshi said, the part about it becoming a peer-to-peer currency, that didn't happen. So then now they're like, oh, it'll help us use renewable energy. It'll help us use some new thing. It's the future. Like, just keep buying it. Just keep buying it. And underneath it all, if you read the paper, it's based on resource extraction. So it's just saying keep extracting resources, and that is the problem with civilization today.
Right. So okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Alex. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the narrative changes periodically, and that's
the sales pitch. The sales pitch.
Yeah, that's more on the people using it. Like Bitcoin, like anything else, is a tool, and it's up to the people using it to determine, how the tool is used. And so some people see it more as a store of value. Part of the reason, like, sure, it's volatile, but it's been volatile from 0 to almost $1 trillion market cap in 12 years. And so that's going to be probably continually volatile as it continues to grow. And I think it's going to be a dominant currency because it is a million times better than the alternatives that we have today.
Question. A dominant currency or a dominant commodity?
Well, here's the thing about money is money has different attributes. So it is a store of value. It is a medium of exchange, are two of the big ones. And so I think that whether you determine whether it's a commodity. I mean, that's the way the U.S. government looks at it for taxable reasons. But I think that's going to change in the future. Right now, like Indies.
Alex, do you buy stuff in Bitcoin?
I do. Yes.
What's the last thing you bought in Bitcoin?
I just paid for a computer today. Like it is something that I do occasionally, and we are so early to this thing. If you look at the adoption rates, it's been continuously growing over time. There's this website I love. It's called Bitcoin Obituaries, and it's all of the times that people have come out and said that Bitcoin is dead, over and over again.
I'm not saying it's dead. I'm just saying it sucks.
Yeah, or that. But
unfortunately, it's not dead. It's like this undead capitalist zombie, like stalking the earth. It's like just consuming resources with no fucking brain to it.
Well, but you just said it's AI. Okay, here's the really, really funny thing that I thought was so great about your article, and not to cut you off, Alex, because I want to hear what you have to say about this as well. But I think the idea that Bitcoin is AI because it's tricking us into just building better and better and bigger GPU and CPU power, and it doesn't, and we don't even realize it. Like that idea is so Black Mirror and fascinating to me that I think it's worth a shout out. Keith says, I can walk with my gold pan and sluice box down to the local creek and mine a few dollars of gold. I can't take my laptop to the internet cafe and do the same with Bitcoin. Guess my vote is with gold.
So if you talk about gold, right, during the gold rush, people did go down to, California and start mining gold. But like Alex is saying, it eventually became like a specialized corporate activity. So essentially it was only at the end of the gold rush, it was only like the large miners with lots of resources who were able to get gold. And look, Bitcoin's positioned as this like upstart. It's not like some upstart anymore. It's part of the capitalist like mainstream. It's like big companies who are making investments and doing this. And the people owning it, like you said, are like insurance companies and billionaires. So it's not this like, oh, we're on the side of like sustainability and income inequality. It's not. It's on the other side. It is Animal Farm. Like you look around the table.
That's fair. I think that's fair. I think we got to be honest with ourselves, and I want to hear more. Like Alex, if you have really like fleshed out opinions on how this solves income equality, I really want to hear those things. But at this point, it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like a commodity that people invest in, and the more people invest in it, because there's value in it, that it's a commodity, it holds value, and it's growing, and people are pouring money into it, and it's a financial instrument. I think if I'm not wrong, Indy, your point is that it's a financial instrument and people need to stop calling it a, kind of a savior for society. Is that your position?
People are, so the sales pitch is that it's like positioned as like solving a lot of abstract problems. But then when you get back to the specifics, it doesn't, or it makes them worse.
Alex?
Yeah. So I think, again, I'm going to bring up that Bitcoin is only 12 years old, and what it's accomplished in this time has been pretty incredible. So,
what is it
as far as, well, it's gone from 0 to almost $1 trillion market cap.
Is that a good, but why is that a good thing?
Well, it's a great thing. It's a great thing because of its properties on how it improves on the broken monetary system we have. So, so
by making more money within a monetary system and you're using a dollar value, it's improved that system?
Well, it's improving the monetary system because it is creating a more fair environment for individuals. So, one of the issues that we have today,
but it's mostly rich people that own Bitcoin. Like Elon Musk owning Bitcoin, is that more fair for anyone?
So one of the things, well, it's fair because the rules are the same for him. So, one of the issues that we have today with an inflationary monetary policy.
But the rules are the same for me with like a dollar bill.
Well, let him finish. Let him finish. I'll let you rebut, Indy. We got all day. Don't worry.
So one of the issues with an inflationary monetary policy, when somebody has a control of the printing press, in the case of the Federal Reserve in the United States, is that as they expand the money supply, the money goes first to the people closest to the printing presses. And they get access to it first and are able to spend it before it's diluted and gets to the other people, and that's super problematic because, if you look at like the people that have gotten rich during this pandemic, or a lot richer, it's the people that own the majority of the assets now, whereas
aren't those the same people buying Bitcoin though?
Sometimes, and that's one of the things about it is like, that is really incredible is you can't just print infinite amounts of Bitcoin and give it to your friends. Now, wealthy people, now I don't have an issue with wealth creation. There's always going to be inequality in society. And part of the reason is because you need an incentive structure that supports productivity, that encourages people to produce things of value. Now, the system that we have today, a lot of people are getting rich. A lot of people are getting rich and benefiting from it without producing value. They're just the ones that have friends in high places or sitting closer to the money printer and are benefiting tremendously for it. People just sit on, blocks of real estate in large cities and just are able to live their entire lives incredibly wealthy as it continues to go up. And what does that do for normal people? Well, it makes housing a little bit more scarce, and it blows up the price of real estate, which really hurts the average person, because
I think you lay out the problem beautifully, and I think that is the problem we live in. And I think I think Indi's perspective is, but Bitcoin doesn't solve that. It's actually Bitcoin is being used to exacerbate it.
Yeah, I think Alex is talking. So he's talking first off, this idea that people have to have incentives, basically you'll starve in order to do stuff. That's just not true. Humans have lived most of our lives without money at all, as in through our evolution. If you look at great art and stuff, people are doing that for God. If you look at the important things in your own life, why am I cleaning my kids' butts 3 times a day? I'm not, they don't pay me. We're quite capable of being motivated by, we don't have to be motivated by poverty. And he's talking about all.
I agree. Oh, sorry. I should follow my advice and let you finish. Sorry.
Oh, no. And then he's talking about, what do you say? He's talking about assets being bad. The rich are getting richer doing whatever. Bitcoin is an asset. So Bitcoin is a part of that problem. It's not a solution to these problems. He's talking, he absolutely identifies the problems correctly. But then he has this weird amorphous thing that Bitcoin is going to save you. And it's not. Bitcoin is just another asset. It's like saying Gucci Mane's gold teeth are going to save people. He doesn't say that. He just says, I like having gold teeth.
So let me sorry, go. Let me real quick, and then I'll let you respond to that, Alex. So it pisses me off because Indy brings up such great points, and then he drops a joke like that, and I just lose my train of thought. So the problem here is that we have a serious income inequality issue, right? Things are going in 2 very different directions, and people are storing their assets in Bitcoin. So there's a point, and I listened to some of these Michael Sayer talk about Bitcoin and saying, we're gonna buy this and we're gonna sit on it, and we're gonna get Visa cards and use Visa cards and take loans out on our Bitcoin and use Visa cards, because Bitcoin's my debt is going to go up by a much lesser amount, and I don't have to move my Bitcoin. My Bitcoin's just so this idea that people aren't going to hoard Bitcoin is just not true. People are hoarding Bitcoin, and they will continue to hoard it as long as it's purely an asset, purely a commodity. They're going to hoard it. Right, and they're not going to sell it, and they're gonna take out loans against it that have a better interest rate, right? That have a smaller interest rate than the interest they're going to make off their Bitcoin, and so it's not going to keep people from hoarding. Bitcoin is not the solution to greed. It's just not. Unless you have an idea against that, Alex. I don't know.
Well, I want to go back to something that Indy said. Money is a fundamental part of human society. It's synonymous with language. It's the way that we measure the value of things, and it's incredibly important. Money has been a part of human history, all of human history, and it's taken various forms.
No, it hasn't. We evolved from apes. We didn't use money then. From most of human history, we didn't use it.
When you go to the earliest civilizations, they have found forms of money. Now, the form of money is, a barter economy, if you look at it realistically, is very impractical.
Barter economies, anthropologists. So David Graeber, I want to just correct that. David Graeber writes about this. There's no actual proof of barter economies. People use Hawala type credit systems.
Exactly.
Right, which is the monetary system.
Yeah, it was just based on sort of value. It's it's the same way within our family, we do stuff, we just do favors for each other. It was largely a favor economy, but there's no documented case of any barter economy.
Yeah, no, exactly. So barter economies are very impractical and don't exist. And money shows up in all sorts of various forms in all sorts of parts of human society. Now, inflationary economies have always failed. It's been the case over and over again, because
You could
once
just say
you
that
start,
economies have always failed. Civilizations always fail. You could also say that.
well, civilizations have flourished, throughout various points. There's always going to be ups and downs in society. Now, Bitcoin is very interesting in the way that its monetary policy is fixed. So that when I say that everybody plays by the same rules, you don't have special benefits from being closer to the regulator or being closer to the money printer. So that's what I mean by that. And that's a problem that gets fixed is there's these like different tiers of
but you do have benefits by being closer to a miner. Like the miner gets the Bitcoin first.
It's that's not how it works, because they have to sell it at the market price. It's not it's not like they're just wisping
but they do get it first.
They do, but they put a tremendous amount of work towards getting it. So, and that's one of the things that I think is really beneficial. So we're looking at things like federal minimum wage of $15. Like, it's a very popular thing or policy that's being demanded by a lot of people around the country. And part of the reason why they're demanding that is because of inflation. And it doesn't fix the problem long term. Now, I'm not vehemently against it because I in this case, I don't think that the businesses are the bad guys necessarily that are just completely eroding away at people's purchasing power. I think that's coming from bad monetary policy. Now, here's the thing about the way that workers. So if you look at 40% of the country does not have any savings at all, which is super problematic. So if you go to work and you get fired, you lose your health insurance, and it's an instant crisis. Part of that is because we've been seeing that productivity has risen pretty dramatically since 1971, but wages have almost been flat. Yes. I think part of that is because our businesses are being forced into risky positions. We see things like stock buybacks being a consistent thing. And part of the reason why they do that is because of inflation. It's cheaper to take on debt than it is to and prop up their asset prices than
American inflation for asset numbers has been quite low. Like, I've lived through 20% inflation. American inflation is quite low for the past 30 years. It's part of the problem, actually.
So that's something I disagree with. So if you
cost of living has increased, but for companies doing share buybacks and stuff, inflation isn't a huge factor in that. For obviously, like, the cost of living has gone up, which you guys don't measure, but what your economists do measure is inflation hasn't.
Yeah, so that's a good differentiation. So I would say that the increase in cost of living is inflation. So that if you go and you look at
I agree with that. It is inflation, but it's not what you measure as inflation.
But those things affect businesses too, because if you look at the rising cost of healthcare, that businesses are paying for employees' healthcare. That's something that's they're paying for the health insurance, and the health insurance is rising in cost, due to partially into inflation. And that is something that's coming out of businesses. If you look at things like property taxes, which are raising because the property values are raising, that's another expense that's increasing. To sit on cash is really a liability for businesses. And so they're forced into risky positions to continue to grow, and that's why we have a lot of zombie companies in America because of the debt-based economy. They can continue to expand and expand by just adding on cheap debt instead of producing things.
Right. So how does Bitcoin solve that?
So Bitcoin is sound money. So you aren't able to do those things. You aren't able to continuously expand the money supply, and borrowing with it is incredibly expensive. And because you have a finite amount. So people are going to be a lot less likely to take risks in the same way with Bitcoin than they would with the dollar, because you don't know. So if you take out a loan in Bitcoin, there's not a guarantee that loan is going to be cheaper in the future. It might be more expensive. Now, again, we're really early on in Bitcoin. It's only been around for 12 years. And so what we're looking at is in the future. And a lot of, what this battle is largely is between Keynesian economics, which it kind of took the reins in the 1940s after the Bretton Woods Agreement, and more solid, sound money Austrian economics. And so there's a lot of.
This is really scary, but go on.
Yeah. So
this is worse than the energy use. This is going to make people hungry.
So for the average person, when they're saving in sound money, they're, instead of their expenses constantly getting more expensive, it stays stable or actually decreases. And so that's what happens under a sound money. Like, a lot of technology is deflationary. So if you build things like computers or cars or cell phones, it should be getting less expensive over time because your supply chain is getting more sophisticated and efficient. The manufacturing process is getting more inexpensive and efficient. If you look at healthcare, for example, it shouldn't be going through the roof. That's a direct cause of an inflationary monetary policy because we've gotten so much more efficient over time.
Dude, Sri Lanka has had 20% inflation for like years, and like we have healthcare. Like, that's, inflation is not the like cause of every problem in America. Like, you guys have like somewhat more complicated problems.
Well, I would disagree with that because I think that money is kind of the base layer of society. It's the way that we communicate.
But then why do we have
value.
healthcare? Why do we have healthcare and you don't? And we've had like a lot of inflation.
Well, Sri Lanka is a very different country than the United States. It's a lot smaller. We have like 360 million people. It's a very diverse.
Okay. Let me rephrase that. Why does like almost everybody with like any sort of basic money have? Why does fucking Cuba have healthcare? Like inflation. Like it wasn't look, to me, this sounds like the Wolf of Wall Street pitch. It's like, your girlfriend doesn't like you, pick up the phone and dial. Like, you're broke, pick up the phone and dial. Like, you don't have healthcare, buy Bitcoin. Like, you're worried about income inequality, buy Bitcoin. It's just like a sales pitch. Like, you're talking about all these problems which are real, but what your Bitcoin is not a solution. But look, what you've been talking about is a very, frankly, right-wing ideology, which is that, so you're saying, oh, the central bank is bad, like these regulations are bad, they're like hurting poor people. And then the answer is to have something controlled by rich people with absolutely no regulation. And look, Republicans did this sales pitch to the American people for like 50 years, saying like, government is bad, we need small government, we need less government. Look at you now. Like, you don't have public health. Like, you're freezing to death in Texas. And you want to do this to your financial system, saying that like, oh, look at all these problems with your system. Let's just get rid of any controls on that system. You're talking about like printing money. Like, you say that's so evil and it hurts people. What America's doing printing money now is to like give checks to people who are hungry. So a lot of times when you print money, like, so in a Bitcoin, a completely Bitcoin economy, you're like, oh, there's a huge pandemic, we need to pay people to stay home from work. But oh, we have this sound money, which is only sound as long as you have it. We have this fixed money supply. Sorry, folks, like, just go hungry. Like, it's actually better to print money. Like, God bless inflation. Inflation is actually good for the poor. Inflation is bad for the rich who are like holding a bunch of money. If I got $10 in my pocket and you're telling me, okay, we'll inflate it, but you can buy some food tomorrow, that's better for me. Inflation is actually good for the poor.
So explain what you mean by that. What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, I don't quite understand what you mean by inflation is good for the poor. Is it because you can print money because fiat money is not a finite resource?
So inflation, like currencies move because of responses to like human affairs. So if it inflates or deflates, that's a response to human affairs. So in the old days, like the king would just like put more nickel in the money and that would screw stuff up. But now there's like modern monetary theory and so on, or like what America is doing, right? Because like people need money, they just like make some money up. And he's saying that's evil, but like that's money that's paying people's rent right now, Whereas Bitcoin's not going to pay anybody's rent. So there's this position of inflation as an abstract evil. It's like saying, oh, negative numbers are evil. Like, well, no, it's just like, depends on the math you do with them. Like, inflation is not necessarily evil. It doesn't cause you to not have healthcare. Like, plenty of people have inflation and have healthcare. It doesn't cause income inequality. Like, plenty of people have inflation and like these are more complex problems that you aren't just going to solve by like changing your currency or your asset class.
Well, here's what I would say is the wealthy don't have the majority of their wealth stored in cash. They have it in assets, which directly benefits from inflation. So that's an important distinguish. or important to distinguish. Yeah. One of the things I love about Bitcoin is that it's apolitical. It's not a right-wing ideology.
Nothing is apolitical. Everything, we live in a society.
It's a tool, and so it's not like the Republicans are jumping on board and supporting Bitcoin. I personally am really sick of the whole right versus left argument going on in the United States, because I don't feel like it's very beneficial to anybody. My whole idea around this is that things don't need to be as expensive as they are, and people under sound money would be more incentivized to have savings, so they could be able to afford things, and that the value that they produce would actually be represented by their money, rather than it getting inflated in a way and getting sucked and whisked into the valuation of wealthy people's assets, which are constantly being more and more centralized. So that's my inherent argument, So I totally agree with you. A lot of times, like when we're watching this red versus left battle, this idea of like privatization of everything that the Republicans suggest, like the government is very inefficient, and that's true. But they use that argument to dodge accountability in most of these circumstances. Right. So yeah, so I just want to distinguish that that I'm not some sort of right-wing grifter. The typical people that I meet with, and talk with Bitcoin about are people that have no savings, and are looking for ways to do that. And their choices are, they can either put their money in a bank account that earns almost zero interest. They can put it into a very risky stock market, which is very complicated, and as we see from the GameStop incident, it's kind of a rigged game in a certain degree, or they can put their money in money that does not have the same type of volatility in its monetary policy as the US dollar, which is Bitcoin. So that's
but Bitcoin is volatile. It's just in the other direction. Like you can't say it's not volatile.
Well, where I say it's not volatile is its monetary policy is fixed in stone. It's not like 12 people sitting in central banks around the country can go and say, hey, we're going to, manipulate this, or we're going to manipulate that, or we're going to create this much money.
But then it gets back to the AI argument, right? Then, so what's the monetary policy? Just like use more resources and like have less of me. Like,
well, I think it's interesting because we're talking about like you brought up this, Indy, about like how how the right wing will often say less is more, less is more, less is more, and we take the arguments away from human beings from actually making decisions. I think the fear here is, and when you brought up AI, in regard to Bitcoin, I think the fear here is that we're going to, with Bitcoin, rich people are going to pour their money into this asset class. And there comes a point where they pretty much own the asset class. And now you have, instead of having people have a conversation about what should or could happen, you take all morals out of it, you take all ethics out of it, and it's a machine. It's run like a machine, and it's living and breathing because it's an asset class that is run by the rich. And I think the fear is now you have no accountability when it comes to people starving at the end of the day, because now you have all of this money and power tied up in this asset class. I think that's the fear for me.
Yeah. And I think it's just being positioned as like a solution. It's being positioned as a sales pitch. So when you make a classic sales pitch, right? Like I've done telemarketing, right? What you do is you like talk about someone's problems and say that this random thing is a solution. You don't talk about in too much detail how it solves the thing, right? You just say that like, oh, you're like broke. Like, so what Alex is saying is he talks to a lot of people who are desperate. Like a lot of people who have, so that's what you sell stuff to. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin is a solution to that desperation. It just means that people are having problems. So right. I think you have to go into more detail as to like how something solves a problem. And I don't think Alex has done that. I don't think Bitcoin can do that. You can get all the detail you need from the original paper, which is that it produces a scarce resource. That's the fixed monetary policy by consuming resources. So the idea that this abstract idea is going to solve everything from like healthcare to like poverty, it's just nonsense. It's like rappers like to buy jewelry. That's cool. They like it because it's cool. People like Bitcoin because it's cool and they think it's worth money, and it shows off and that's, people have been doing that forever. But the idea that this like new cool thing, which is just some perverse source of resource extraction, is going to solve all our ills, that's just a sales pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Is like Bitcoin isn't a fix all in all of society, but sound money principles definitely do have a lot of solutions to issues that we currently see today. And I've kind of gone over it. I mean, the biggest solution that I brought up multiple times is that Bitcoin allows people to save in a unique way. You know, one of the issues that happens when your money is in a bank is that you don't really own it. So if things break, which they do, you know, it's happened to tons of people all over the world throughout human history. It's happened a lot, you know, in the past couple of years. You know, if you look at Lebanon, it's crazy what people are experiencing there. They have
that can all happen with Bitcoin. Like the exchange can break and then the value can suddenly plummet.
But yeah, it's less likely, right? Because it's built on the blockchain, and so a blockchain is so decentralized that it's very
the
easy.
blockchain is just how it moves up or down. It doesn't say that it doesn't, like, the value doesn't disappear.
Oh, for sure, for sure. The value can be gone tomorrow, absolutely, but it's not. You're not going to get like hijacked for it.
Yeah, but in order to take it out into like sort of cash and whatever, people inevitably go to exchanges because the Bitcoin algorithm actually isn't like great at that. And then those exchanges, like, you do have a centralized authority. Like it's evolved a centralized authority. Like everything does. Like, look, I've seen people try remember people like trying communism, and they're like, oh, it's going to be decentralized, and suddenly, oh shit, it's centralized.
Right.
Like, that's what's happened with Bitcoin.
Right. Well, the same thing happens with capitalism, right? Everything's supposed to be decentralized, and all of a sudden it's centralized, and then you have fascism. So it's like nothing is going to stop the greed. Like, that's the thing. Like, we have to stop pretending that some random thing, some magical new theory or new currency or new something is going to fix humans. We're fucking flawed.
Yeah, and if you're looking for like examples of like what's going to fix people, you could look for like literally look to like indigenous civilizations, or like look at like African money systems, or like hawalas. There's like other money systems which might be like better than like this like latest like rich guy toy.
Well, and you brought up earlier like about how, you know, money was not necessarily something that has always existed in human civilization, and I would argue that it is. Now, obviously, we have evolved from primates, but at a certain point, when we started having civilizations, villages, you know, farming, when we started owning things, money is critical. It's a critical process. It's a means of exchange. It's a trust, right? You use money in lieu of trust. We just, instead of trusting each other, we trust the fucking paper.
Yeah, but look at your own life, right? Like a lot of the things you're doing. So David Graeber writes a lot about this in the book Debt, the late David Graeber. He's amazing. But if you look in your own life, like we've gotten this idea that everything is a market, and that's a very new idea. Like, you know, even in the sort of what you call the Middle Ages, like kings would sort of look down on merchants. They're like, oh, they're like touching money. Like, I don't need to touch money. Like, I just get my stuff and I stab people. Like, like I don't know where I was going with that, but. No, so if you look at your daily life, like, look, like, why am I feeding my kids? Like, these guys don't pay me. Like, but we do things like, why are you nice to your wife? Like, what's the market? Like, look, everything. I think the problem we've got to as a society is a lot of stuff that's important doesn't show up in GDP. And we're just increasing GDP. GDP is just like a measure of climate change, essentially. So Alex is saying, oh, like Bitcoin is worth like $1 trillion market caps. Okay, so why? Like, what good does that do? Like, what about all like, so there's a lot of things. We got to get away from this thing that money is so central to our lives, because you just look at your daily life, like wake up in the morning and like track it, and you'll be like, most of the stuff you're doing is not for money. Like, you're doing it for love or for hate or for just boredom.
Right. Well, I think it's important to recognize that Alex is looking at Bitcoin as a tool. He's not looking at it as something that is, you know, is the be all end all.
Yeah, but when he says it's a tool, the only thing, when you asked him, the only thing he said, like, what has it done? He said it produced $1 trillion market cap. So that's like that's what it's done.
Is that all it's done, Alex?
Yeah, I don't think that's really a fair representation of what I've been saying.
It's not everything you're saying, but you did say that in response to one question.
Hold on a second. Hold on. So one of the things that I found really interesting about Bitcoin, and when I started learning about monetary theory, is the way that the incentive structure works. So, you know, there's something called time preference, and it is short time or low time preference is when you are able to think long term, and you're willing to do things like save and build things that are valuable. And high time preference is more of the attitude of short-term thinking. So there's this website I love called WTFhappened in1971.com. And there's a bunch of charts of various things on there that with just an arrow on it pointing to 1971, which is when we came off the gold standard. And so if you look at that chart, incarceration rates have gone through the roof since we went off the gold standard. Divorce rates have gone through the roof.
Nicolas Cage movies. There's been a large increase in Nicolas Cage movies since then as well. No, like, dude, if you pick a number and then you point to stuff after it, of course, like things go up. Like that's not like a correlation.
No, that is a correlation.
Sorry, it's not a causation.
It definitely is a correlation, and it very well could be a causation.
I know people were born in 1971. Maybe it was their fault.
For God's sakes, if we didn't go off the gold standards, we wouldn't have Nicolas Cage movies. I mean, but
the graph would tell you the same
respect
thing.
That,
the graph would tell you the same thing. Yeah.
I know. I was just joking.
Sorry.
So yeah, when you look at like healthy economic families that have savings, they're a lot more stable than families that don't, that are living paycheck to paycheck. And so that's something I'm really passionate about, is because, we see all sorts of issues today. Like, I totally agree with Indy that money is not the end all be all. We need to strive for meaning and purpose in our lives. Now, one of the things that, gets in the way of that is the constant struggle to, find and attain financial stability,
right.
And that's what I'm saying
right.
when there's inflation. So when you have savings and you have money in the bank, you have financial stability, you're able to enjoy things in your life more, like being with your family, investing in your relationships. You have more of a long-term time preference or low time preference, so there's going to be less issues around like drug addiction, which is a very high time preference activity, and that's something like that I have a lot of experience in working in the behavioral health and social work field is, if you look at somebody that is addicted to drugs, they're willing to surrender long-term goals for short-term goals. That immediate high. And I think that's, directly correlated to, some of the issues that we have in our society is around that time preference, which is influenced by the way that the money works.
But dude, Bitcoin's not an answer to that. You could just get like an Asian parent. Like they tell you to save. Like, I don't get it. Like, how is Bitcoin the solution to that?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I don't think Bitcoin is a solution to that, but I understand his point is that when you don't have to worry about money, like, I can't tell you how often I'm like, I look at like my savings and I'm like, okay, if my work dried up tomorrow, how long will we be okay for? I think about this like 5, 6, 7 times a day. Like how long are we okay if my work dries up, if my clients dry up, if everything dries up, how long am I okay for? And so if, every day closer to how long I'm okay for, like that just, the stress goes through the roof, the fear goes through the roof. And so in psychology, in behavioral psychology, Alex is right. It's going to push you over the edge to try to get that short-term high to fix that long-term problem. Now, is Bitcoin going to solve that? No, it's not. That's just, let's be real. But
Bitcoin's like another short-term high. Like that would make Michael's worries. Like Bitcoin just makes him a good mark for that. It doesn't make Bitcoin a good solution for like his problem.
And it has. I'll be honest. Like since I first started, like I try to diversify my investments. So I've put in $100 a month in Bitcoin over the last 18 months, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, good decision, Michael. Way to go. Like that was a rocking decision.
And then he comes and he tells me about it, and I'm like.
And then she's like, oh, so you're supporting the anonymous black market, the dark web, you fucking asshole.
And how often are you checking it? Like, how often do you check?
I got an app, bro. I check it like 6 times a day.
Yeah, so this is suddenly the solution to like drug addiction, like checking your Bitcoin status like 6 times a day.
Dude, I have a robot that works on my pool. I stared at my pool robot for 10 minutes today. I think that's a good investment.
Your pool robot doing something. Your pool robot is cleaning your pool. Your
That's
pool robot
true.
is like a good contributor to the civilization.
To the household.
When we're all gone, your pool robot will be there, and people will be grateful.
He'll outlive all of us.
Alex, I'm sensing you're getting upset with us.
No, I'm not. It's a good time, it's a good conversation, and I think like the hard thing for Bitcoin, or for people like understanding Bitcoin in the beginning, is that it is something that's truly new and different in a lot of ways. And it's definitely a paradigm shift, because to be able to understand it, you kind of have to understand the history of money. You have to understand game theory. You have to understand computer science. So it is, this huge thing, and it is definitely a very nuanced conversation that requires a lot of different topics to be covered to get it. So, talking about like the behavioral science, like sound money versus inflationary money is very, clear what the differences are. If your money is going to be stable or gain value over time, you're going to be less likely to spend it. If you know that your money is losing value, it's an imminent thing. You're gonna want to spend it, or put it into something that isn't, which is why we have such an over leveraged society right now. So but
isn't that the cat chasing its tail though? Isn't that the big problem? Like, because you need money moving.
Well, that's also a very good argument for why people are more willing to do things with their supposed savings account money in the United States, because it gains so little, that.
Well, that's a really fucking good point, because we were talking about that earlier, about how, crypto, or how Bitcoin is a store of value. And so I'm never going to spend my Bitcoin. Like I look at it as an investment, and that can't be good for a functioning economy. That's just an investment that I'm going to be dependent on for the future. And I'm a buy and hold investor. Like, I'm never going to sell it until like I die and it goes to my kids. Like, that's just reality. Cameron says, Mike, when will you dump your BTC into CryptoArt? CryptoArt is something that has exploded over the past couple months, which is absolutely insane. Indy, tell it, what do you know about CryptoArt?
I was just reading this article about it. It also like uses energy. So there's this, I guess I can link to it, but there's a long article where someone's going into like, it's the same like fundamental issues with sort of like this technology, which is a technology fundamentally based on sort of like resource extraction. Like, to understand Bitcoin, like just read the paper by like Satoshi or whatever white guy was cosplaying as a Japanese person. But like, but like a lot of it is like, and I think Alex is like really correct in that this is something new, and I think it is like something cool. Like, I think it is something interesting, but we have to look at it critically, not as like a panacea for like all ills, like not like a solution for everything from like drug addiction to healthcare to inequality. Like, you live in a society, like societies have complex problems. They don't have simple solutions. You can't be like, oh, I'm like using like titanium instead of gold, and like suddenly like my son is off drugs. Like, it doesn't like work like that. And the idea that like some unregulated like algorithmic thing, which is, if you look at the algorithm, it's a very simple algorithm, extremely elegant, but it's a very simple algorithm. It's got very little input into like whether people have like fucking healthcare or not. Like, there's much poorer societies like whether that have health. Like the only thing the algorithm does is produce resource use for a scarce commodity. So that in itself is quite dangerous. If you don't look at that directly and use it in like a logical human way, then you end up with like climate change and like just rich people getting richer. Same shit, basically. Animal Farm.
Yeah, I have a hard time disagreeing with that, man. I mean, just looking at how it's exploded based on the amount of larger investors putting money into it, like it's impressive. Like, it's incredible how these giant companies are now gaining faith in Bitcoin as a store of value. They're putting it on their balance sheet, but it's an asset on their balance sheet. It's not how they're moving money around. It's not how they're creating a vibrant economy. It's simply an asset. And to think that it's anything other than that, and I'm still going to invest in it, you guys. I'm still going to like put, my $100 a month in my Bitcoin, because I want to diversify my asset classes, but I look at it as an asset class that I'm not going to sell. And I know that. I'm just being honest about it.
You got to think about Animal Farm. Like, Animal Farm, the pigs and the animals are like, oh, humans are bad. Like humans are causing all these ills to us, all the problems. They identified all the problems correctly, and then they took over. But then by the end of it, you look around the table and look around the Bitcoin table now, like pigs and humans, like billionaires and like immigrants. Can you like tell them apart? Like you can't. It's become the end of Animal Farm. So that book didn't have a happy ending.
Damn.
So there was a couple things that you guys brought up, which I thought was interesting. So sound money doesn't mean that people aren't going to spend it. You know, people need to buy things. They just
can you say sound? Can you because I've heard people call Bitcoin sound money, and I've heard people call Bitcoin smart money. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So sound money is the idea of the market deciding the value of it, and it not necessarily being centrally manipulated, and for it to have scarcity attached to it instead of an unlimited expansionary policy.
Then why not,
so
why
like
not just go back to, so people talking about sound money are like gold standard. Why not just go back to gold? Like, why do we need to like make CPUs smarter or GPUs smarter?
Well, but there's an easy answer for that, and it's movement, it's speed, it's efficiency. It's so expensive to move gold from Germany to Japan, right? It's so expensive. I can move Bitcoin from Germany to Japan really fast, and that movement in the market would actually allow that expansion and that growth.
But you can do that. You can do that through hawalas. Like you can do that. Like people move large amounts of money between Mumbai and Dubai, just through like bro.
Right, and I'm sure it's all legit.
None of it's legit. What are you talking about?
Actually,
like it's like outside of like I can make a lot of the arguments like you don't want a central authority, fine, use a hawala. Like you want like you can use a lot of the same arguments for like two dudes with like fucking phones who are like not using much electricity. Right.
You're just saying that the purpose of Bitcoin, according to Satoshi, was always the ability to move money around quickly in a decentralized way. But
so his paper says it's for a peer-to-peer financial transaction thing, and like that's not really what it's like turned into.
What it's become.
Yeah, he called it a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So it's definitely not cash. Like people don't use Bitcoin as cash. You're not using it as cash. Like you're using it as an asset. Like you don't like hold your dollar bills under your mattress to like give to your kids, or like you don't check your dollar bill.
I don't know that that's not anybody.
Okay, but nobody's checking. Nobody's building an app to like check. Oh, I guess you have like currency exchanges, but nobody's building an app that just tells you what the fucking dollar is doing.
So yeah, I mean that's an interesting point. So like to put things into perspective, right now there's 19 trillion US dollars circulating, and it's a market. So that's the market cap of the dollar. And right now Bitcoin's at about $1 trillion, and that's just for one country, in the entire world. And if you go and you look at all the different fiat currencies, I mean, there's hundreds of them depending on the country. So that's one of the things that's really beneficial about something like Bitcoin is that it's borderless, and we've talked about sending money across borders and how difficult it is. The only reason why there are these fiat monies is because the governments enforce borders and they enforce the money. There's legal tender laws in these countries, or else people would just use whatever is the most convenient currency. Now, just because people aren't using it as a peer-to-peer cash system doesn't mean that it doesn't have those properties. Like I can send money to a vendor, if I want to, without using third parties. I can send it to my girlfriend. I can send it to my friends in Mexico. I can do those things, if I choose to. Now we're in a what's called price discovery right now. People are trying to figure out what the value of Bitcoin as a global monetary system is, and so there's going to be a lot of volatility to the upwards as we get to that point. But at some point, it's going to reach this market cap where there's so much money in it. It's not going to be manipulated, or it's not going to be as volatile in the same way. It'll take a lot more money to move the market in the same way. Now, one Bitcoin is always one Bitcoin, and that's something that's really important because a dollar's value is constantly changing because of the increase of supply.
But a dollar is always a dollar. Like you're talking about exchange rates, like a dollar is always a dollar also.
So if you look at what money is it's a measurement tool of value. Now the dollar is a measuring tool that's constantly changing in supply, whereas Bitcoin isn't. So, that's
Bitcoin
what
is
I think
constantly
will be
changing, and the exchange rate of Bitcoin is constantly changing.
But he's not talking about the exchange rate though. He's talking about the amount, the actual amount. I wanted to say physical amount, and then I was like, I can't say that.
well, right. But that was one of the points that he was making a minute ago. So I was thinking back to like when I worked on the cruise ship and I got paid by my purser in American dollars, but then I would go to a bank in the Caribbean to deposit my money, and they took a large percentage of that for me to put it back in my bank in the United States.
Right. Which with Bitcoin it wouldn't.
If my purser would pay me in Bitcoin.
If your purser would pay you in Bitcoin, right? Because if he hands you American dollars, you can't just like put it into the app in your fucking phone.
And this thing still connects to the normal financial system. Like if you get paid in Bitcoin, you still want to like get it out in cash at some point. When people talk about Bitcoin, even Alex is talking about its value in dollars. Like it's always like an exchange rate. So, and also he's positioning something that doesn't, something which there's a fixed supply of as being inherently good. And it's not. It's just a mathematical property. You have to look at it. What does it do in a society? What does it do to your earth?
Right.
Is that good? Math. Yeah. Math is not like an abstract good or bad. Like in this case, it's just, if you look, it's doing bad. And then all the points he's talked about, it's not addressing those problems.
Right. But Alex has been saying it's a tool, and a tool is not inherently good or bad. It's how you use it. But to your point, you can't solve the problems that we're talking about solving just with Bitcoin inherently. But I think there is an interesting, point to be made here about the exchange across these monetary systems, because you need some sort of exchange. I was listening to the dude who just put $1 billion in Bitcoin just prior. I think it's Michael Salazar. Is that right, Alex?
Saylor.
Michael Saylor, right? He was the one that taught Elon Musk how to put $1.5 billion of Tesla's assets into Bitcoin. And what he says, and I heard a podcast and him saying this the other day, what he says is that he's never going to sell his Bitcoin, right? He's going to take debt instruments out against the Bitcoin. He's going to take out loans, and he's encouraging people to do this, right? The people who are propping up this monetary system are encouraging people to do this. He says he recommends taking and you can't do this yet, but it's coming, and he's pushing for it. Taking debt out against your Bitcoin, right? Because the interest rate is going to be lower than the growth of the Bitcoin. And so that's not going to solve any problems. That's just creating an asset class like real estate that you can take a loan out against and live your life using your Visa card with a loan against your Bitcoin. And I don't see how that solves any problems.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about something like that is larger institutions getting into the space will actually create a little bit more stability, at least from the price, because it takes a lot of the Bitcoin, a lot of the supply, and puts it on the side. So I think that inherently is a positive. Now, what money is it represents value. And so a lot of times, like where people get mixed up is they think, at least with sound money, is they think that, hoarding the money is necessarily a negative. People are rewarded with money for producing value. And I think that is what's important to distinguish there. So Bitcoin is not like one of the common misconceptions with it is that it is like a stock, in the same way, but it's not. It's denominated in 100 million Satoshis. So that's why you're able to buy $100 worth, every week or every month or however much, or somebody could buy $1 worth or $5 worth, or,
right.
If you go into other countries where it's worth, their currency is worth a little bit less, you can buy small fractions of it, and so I don't think that's inherently a bad thing, because what that's doing is it's actually kind of an incredible thing, is that it's taking these companies that are benefiting largely from this really broken, unfair monetary system and transitioning them into another one because it's better. It's all about incentive processes, and I think that's in the long run is going to be a net positive for normal people.
Yeah, I'm very suspicious when people talk about incentives, because in economic terms, incentives means like completely unstructured psychological experiments we're running on poor people. Like that's like what incentives means. They're like, oh, what if they're starving? Will they work harder? Like if they're enslaved, if like the currency keeps disappearing because computers are solving Sudoku puzzles, what will happen to people? Let's see.
I mean, I think incentives are very important. You know, we all show up to work because we have responsibilities. You know, we might have families that we need to put food on the table for. So that's an incentive to work and to
Yeah, but
produce
monetary
value in
policy
society.
shouldn't be doing that, man. Monetary policy should be trying to like, our policy should be trying to like reduce poverty, not trying to like run psychological experiments on people. And that's a big problem with modern economics. It's based on like a bunch of faulty psychological assumptions. And then you built this entire fucking system on it. And then it like melts the earth and people are like hungry. Like there's other ways to do shit, man. Like other countries, other like other people do things like different ways.
Right.
Like,
I think that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Look, I don't think capitalism is going to solve the problems with capitalism. Like a lot of the problems Alex is talking about are like problems within capitalism, within America. And he's like, wait, what if we do the same thing, but harder with computers? And it's like, maybe not, like maybe try something else.
That was okay. So we have a close friend whose daughter goes to an art school, and they had a big scandal come out the other day. And what was her specific quote? It was so perfect. We can solve racism by doing racism.
So you want to tell the story?
Makes much sense as anything. Like,
it was like they were sequestering different ethnic groups.
Yeah, they're basically separating ethnic groups to get, and okay, so it's the idea is it's an affinity group, right? You're making people feel safe so they can talk about how they feel specifically culturally, because, and so I get it from both perspectives. Like I can understand that, like a safe space for your culture or your cultural group or your ethnic group, but at the same time, like
what representation does it have in the larger conversation?
Right. And we're still segregating you. It's weird. It's a complicated conversation for sure.
Yeah,
Nobody
I mean, I think
that one.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
definitely an interesting subject of how to deal with those specific social problems, but. Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to, like, this has been an age-old battle. You know, it's one that I really enjoy reading into, kind of going back to the Bretton Woods Agreement, you know, and reading Friedrich Hayek and reading what John Maynard Keynes' ideas on things were, you know, and it's an argument between whether markets are more efficient at distributing or allocating wealth, which is what I believe. And it sounds like, Indi, you're more on the side of, you know, there needs to be a central authority controlling that. Now, one of the things that I really believe is that.
No, I'm on the side that I'm on the side that there isn't like some abstract solution to that. It's that it has to be like a balance, and you need people balancing these things. Like it's not like, oh, like look, in the West you've gotten fucking crazy, man. Like look at Texas. You're like, markets are great. Like markets are going to deliver us. Markets have not delivered you. Like you guys are more like Vietnam should have finished up with you guys and fucking come to America, and that would have like been better for you. Like Vietnam's better run. Like like there's this idea that it's just a simple debate between like markets and like central authority. No, it's not. It's about like the right authority. It's about the right markets. Like I'm not like a communist per se. I'm a Buddhist, and there's this idea of right action. It's like not doing the this thing or that thing, but just doing the correct thing. And I think people have lost that.
The correct thing in the moment, right? And I think that's the hardest thing for an AI to understand. And so we've got this weird thing where we're building these, you know, more impressive computers to mine our Bitcoin.
No, the AI should be better able to understand it, especially when it came to Texas, for example, right? Because the AI should have been able to envision a very, very cold winter,
right?
Which is what people are too short-sighted.
Right, but the AI would have to care. The AI would have to give a shit.
But if it cares about keeping its systems going,
but it would have to become, once it becomes self-replicating, where it doesn't need human beings to shovel the coal. That's when it doesn't care about human beings anymore.
Coal shoveling.
No, but AI will only solve. An algorithm will only solve the problem that you give it, right? So there's one example of like someone made an algorithm for something to like jump higher, and the thing kept building stacks of blocks and like falling over because like according to the algorithm that like solve the problem. Like when I was learning touch typing in school, we figured out that if you just held the E button down, right, there was this game, you would like get like a high score. So like a computer like will do that. Like, so if you look at, so I think go back to the Bitcoin paper, right? You can debate it endlessly, but the paper is very clear. The thing prioritizes higher CPU usage over time and higher electricity consumption. And that's what it does. And everything else is sort of like a sales pitch by like very like secondary, tertiary like people. If you go back to the original source, that is what it says on the tin.
Well, right. But I mean, if at the end of the day, Bitcoin could solve the monetary problem and get rid of the centralized banking system and get rid of all the other carbon producing institutions, then that's a different conversation, right? But I just don't think it can.
No, if it replaced the monetary supply, the energy usage would be more than like the planet. It would be extraplanetary. Like then it would be like full like Matrix level where like, oh shit, we're like in tubes, like we're batteries.
Can anyone, we need somebody to go fact check that. I need to know how much energy would be required to replace the monetaries. I need to know, this is what I need to know. I need to know how much energy it would take to replace the entire monetary system with Bitcoin, and how much CO2 is actually being produced by the people who have created the infrastructures and the institutions that support the current monetary system.
If it's Argentina now, there's only like 200 countries.
Though, whether we're conscious or not, like globally, we're supporting that need.
What? Which need?
The need to sustain the global banking system.
Right.
We're supporting that.
Well, sure. We're supporting. We're either going to be supporting it with Bitcoin, or we're going to be supporting it with the traditional methods. But the question is, what would cause more carbon emissions?
Dude, it's 100% Bitcoin, man. Because like gold, you only like so our emissions now are like that captures the monetary system. That includes the monetary system. So the global emissions now. So if Bitcoin is using the emissions of Argentina now, there's only like 200 countries, and Argentina is like near the top of it. And I just checked like a while back, and it was Sri Lanka. And Argentina is much bigger than Sri Lanka. So if Bitcoin takes over all the transactions of Argentina, plus America, plus UK, plus Russia, it is more than the resource usage of Earth as it is.
I'm going to trust you in this moment because you're very smart, but
no, look it up.
I want to know for sure. Cameron says GME Mooners became flag bearers for the common man's fight against consolidated market forces. Do you think they'll be fighting the same fight against crypto hedge funds eventually?
I do not understand that sentence.
Yeah, that's a pretty funny question, and it's interesting to look at it in the future. I think one of the things that gives these hedge funds currently such a large advantage is that they're in bed with the regulators and they have special privilege over normal people. And part of the reason why that is just the way that the monetary system is built to benefit some people first before others.
Right.
And so I think it's going to look a lot different in the future, but that's really interesting to think about. I mean, I think there will always be people trying to get ahead at other people's expense, and there will be manipulation of markets, and there'll be other issues, but a market that has a money that has a very fixed monetary supply, which rules are set in stone, are a lot more difficult to manipulate than a market where, if you make a bad mistake, you just get a bailout with printed money from the people controlling it. So
right. And I think you made an interesting point before, because there's no difficulty getting, like, I can get into Bitcoin with like $10. Now it's going to cost me $1 to get into Bitcoin with my $10, but I'm going to be able to get into it. Whereas there's a much more difficult margin for me to get into the stock market or something. Well, and it's changed with Robinhood and things like that. There's a whole nother set of issues that goes along with that.
Yeah. How many?
So look, if you're talking about getting into the monetary policy,
we could spiral into a rabbit hole here.
No, he is right. The monetary policy is like biased in that. So a central bank creates money, and then they give it to essentially primary dealers. So there are people who have access to government securities, bonds, essentially cash that way. So there are some quite sensible arguments for giving people access to the central bank directly, as in giving people central bank accounts. But then the idea that Bitcoin is somehow, the idea that Bitcoin is going to replace all of this is not true. It would always be part of like some hybrid system. Like monetary systems don't generally completely replace each other. They're connected.
Well, but if we're saying that it's like 12 years old, like, wouldn't a lofty pursuit wouldn't that be like to be considered like a 10%?
Oh, right.
Like,
Of the global financial markets.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's fine, but people are still like doing stuff for like favor basis, right? People are like still like in Sri Lanka, people still do like transact in gold to some degree. Like you like if you want to like get something, you go and pawn a bangle. Like, so it's like these old systems, which are like thousands of years old, like Hawala systems are like thousands of years old. So
okay, so
you
I
have to talk
find
about
that
within
very romantic.
What?
Like the history of the actually like exchanging actual goods.
Right. Yeah.
So if you want to go back to fiat currency, like literally you can just go ask an Asian parent. They'll be like, yeah, gold. Like you can wear it. It's cool. Like it makes people like impressed with you at the wedding. And then like when shit hits the fan, you can like pawn it. So like that, and it's not like involving some like GPU farm, like spewing out coal, like, you know, like there's other, like, so there's some arguments. Like for Bitcoin, what they're doing is they're taking a lot of problems. It's a sales pitch. You find the customer's problems, and then you make you talk about their problems. Always talk about the customer's problems. Always talk about the customer's problems. And then boom, there's this product. So, but like if you go into the specifics, just read the Satoshi document. Like it's just a thing that like produces less of a thing, solving Sudoku puzzles, and like uses energy. Like the algorithm isn't going to magically solve these problems.
No, it's not. I mean, the algorithm is not going to solve these problems, you know, and it gets so deep, right? Because, you know, I think, was it Albert Einstein who said you can't solve you can't use the same logic to solve the problem you created with that logic, right? So the idea is that we want to solve the problem of income inequality, or we want to solve the problem of poverty, or we want to solve these problems, yet we're using a, you know, very capitalistic way of solving them. And like, you know, the problem at the end of the day is that you will always have greed, and you will always have consolidation of power. So regardless of what I almost said, irregardless, but I didn't. I stopped myself.
You can say it. You can say it.
Well, the dictionary says I can say it, but I refuse. But the point being is that, you know, socialism always concentrates power and turns into communism. Capitalism always concentrates power and turns into fascism. Like there has to be a nuance if we're going to figure out how to move forward with this. And maybe Bitcoin is part of the solution, but it's not anywhere near the entire solution. We need to get away from thinking about it as if it is, and stop using marketing pitches to drive up the value for billionaires.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I'll go back to my argument that money is one of the base layers of society, and I really vehemently believe that, you know. And so you need a money that is like strong and not falling apart for society to be stable, you know. And I think, like, you know, you look at inflation, which I think is you know, really hurting society, and like the instability and distrust for government and authorities that we've seen over, you know, since 2008, and, you know, since we came off the gold standard. I think those are directly correlated. Now, as far like, one of the things I find really attractive about sound money is that we have limited government. Now, one of the what I mean by that is that
I'm sorry, Alex. Go ahead. I just saw Indy's face, and it just cracks me up every time you bring up sound money and limited government. He just has this face, but I apologize for interrupting you.
It's the same like right-wing argument. It's like, why did you go back to the gold standard?
Wait. I'm sorry. I know I did, and I gave you permission to interrupt. I'm sorry, Alex.
So one of the issues that we have today is, like, I think pretty much everybody's unhappy. You know, I don't think that like universal healthcare is an awful argument, you know, but where if you look at the priorities that are being set forth, it's you know, bailing out big banks, it's giving money to people in high places, it's constantly fighting forever wars in other countries, you know, which is something super problematic. And the way they're able to get away with this is by you know, one of the biggest pieces of accountability is taxes. You know, is there's the implicit tax that they're taking from you, you know, and if that gets too high, people get unhappy and they say no, you know. But what they're able to do is they're just able to print money, which is also a tax, because it's devaluing people's money but it's just not as like overt and in your face. It's something that happens slower, you know. And I think that's something that's really attractive, is if you have a money that isn't like, you're not able to do that with, people have a stronger voice in their government of choosing the things that, you know, they want them to do. Because I'm pretty sure most people don't want us going to war. You know, it's really expensive, it's morally wrong. You know, and the only way that they're able to fund it is by a constant expansion of money. And so I think that's something that I find really attractive about the idea of sound money.
I have so much
It's
to
not
say.
like limited government isn't about how big or how small the government is. It's just about like their power, because, you know, there's not a whole lot of accountability when like both sides agree that we're just going to continuously expand and expand and expand. You know, we don't
Right. I mean,
necessarily
at a certain point, like that's the thing. That's the thing about financial markets, is they're driven on expansion. They're driven on growth. And anytime you see a contraction in growth, everything loses its value. Like, right. Nothing can be valuable if we're not making more. Right. And it's crazy. It's crazy.
And that's some of the push with the expansion of the green movement and green energy, is that a bunch of shit fucks who were making a lot of money off of not green energy jumped over to green energy, and now they're going to make a shit ton of money doing that.
Off so, not even green. Like there's so much energy. There's so much, you know, marketing when it comes to green energy from people who are invested in green energy. That's not really as green as they say it is.
But if you mention that people should just stop having so many children, then they get really angry.
Oh, you can't say that. You're not allowed to talk about that. Population control. Dun, dun, dun. Population control.
Look, it's not necessarily like the children the problem. So like, I think more than half of emissions are coming from the 1%. So here we have the 1% saying that like, and 1% means you're making over like $120,000 a year. So if
globally, right.
So here we have the 1% saying, oh no, we have the solution for the problem that we're causing. You know, like, let's just mine more minerals, you know,
right.
Have you played StarCraft?
Right, but remember the number of countries, like Italy has a social campaign out now to tell people to stop smoking because it's lowering their sperm counts. Like, countries are very into people having babies.
Oh, yes.
But you need, like, babies are good. Babies like produce value. Like the problem is like endless growth and emissions. Look, like people, there's the idea of degrowth, which is that like people don't, like I earn maybe like maybe $15,000 a year. No, probably more than that. I earn about let's say about 24. So like you can like live like pretty well on that. And like Americans have gotten into this idea that we need to have more and more money. Money is going to solve our problems. And it's like, no, your problems are maybe like a bit more complex. Maybe you need like a functioning government that gives you services cheaper, or you don't need to consuming more. So Bitcoin is just feeding into that thing, that deep need of like, oh, we need more money to like survive. Like, Michael, like, why are you hedging your bets in Bitcoin? You're like, I need this shit like to survive if like one of these other things goes south. And like, so Bitcoin is part of the problem.
And like, you have a rich history, but like, you know, my family's history, you know, we buried my grandma like 10 years ago, who had a basement full of like pristinely saved styrofoam cups and twist ties and everything that you would preserve if you had grown up in the Depression and eaten your cat.
And we're going to be like that with COVID. Like, we're going to be like, why do you have so much rice in the house? It's like, because.
Let me ask you a quick question, and we got to wrap up here in a little bit, but let me ask you a quick question, Indy, about inflation, because you said, you know, $24,000 a year is a very comfortable income in Sri Lanka, but inflation is 20% a year. Like, how do those two things
inflation was 20% a year during the war. So now it's less.
Oh.
But so like we definitely have like a higher inflation environment than America. And like, say like a fixed deposit here can easily earn like 10 to 15%. So we can get 10 to 15% interest rates. And that's like because the inflation is higher. And we actually can't print money just because like printing money is reserved for like whoever has the guns generally. So like the bigger guns. Right. So it's like, so we live in a country where it's like there is higher inflation, and also people do save more, and like whatever. But like that's not because of Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin, like switching to like a cryptocurrency doesn't change those problems. Those are like much more complicated. Like, so what a lot of Bitcoin advocates are talking about are like very complex problems, and they're like, but if we change the monetary system, and like, but then you have to like look around the world and be like, wait, no, other people like do that stuff in different ways.
In different
Without,
ways, right? Right. So yeah. So it seems to me that we should look at Bitcoin as an investment class asset, and use it for what it's good for or worth, and realize that it's not going to solve our problems. Keith just said, "Yeah, guns." Like anytime somebody says guns, he's just happy for. He just loves guns. Thank you, Indy, for mentioning guns, so Keith could be happy. So I would like to take a second, and for you guys, if you have a final thing that you want to say, and also tell people where they can find you. I really appreciate you guys coming on today. I know it's an uncomfortable thing to like.
It's always the most difficult, where we have people coming from different perspectives.
Well, yeah, it is, but I think it's so important, right? If we don't have these conversations, like, then we're just fucking jerking each other off, and like the last thing I want to do is have a circle jerk show. I mean, can we be honest about that? Yeah, Indy, tell it. We don't, but on a serious note, like, we don't need that. Like, so many, different things that you watch. It's just like people who believe
so many jokes,
but people just, they're not coming at it from a perspective. It's like, okay, let's bring out an argument. Let's discuss it. Let's debate it. And let's help people walk away with a better understanding of the fundamental topic. And I appreciate you, both of you, for your bravery and showing up today to do just that. Indy, tell people where they can find you.
Indi.ca. So worldwideweb.indi.ca, and that redirects to the Medium. And then on Twitter, it's Indica. And I just want to give a shout out to Northwind. I said, and I think everyone should invest in big guns.
Is there mean that? Is it like your arms?
Yeah, big guns. Like everyone should actually.
Yeah, he's talking about guns. Alex from Tucson Bitcoin, tell people how they can find you, please.
Well, Indy, I also have to say I'm a fan of big guns as well.
Oh shit!
And I'd be curious to learn more about what that's like in Sri Lanka. But
we're not allowed to buy guns, dude. We're not fucking crazy.
Oh, okay. Well, I am a fan of big guns, so I'm with you there, Northwind. But yeah, you can find me at the Tucson Bitcoin podcast. I think a great resource to learn more about Bitcoin, if you're really interested in diving deep, is the website Unchained Capital. If you look for the articles by Parker Lewis, he does a really fantastic job of lining things out. But yeah, I'm on Twitter at Tucson Bitcoin, and yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you guys joining us today. It's been a phenomenal conversation. I think there's so much nuance here. I obviously, I don't think Bitcoin is the answer to all our problems. It's an interesting asset class that I think should be looked at it from that perspective. If you can do good with it, do good with it. At the same time, we've got other human problems that we need to solve as well, and simultaneously. So thank you both for joining us today. It's been truly a pleasure. I hope you both come back in the future, and you're not mad at me for pitting you against each other. And thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Alex.